So, great honor to host our guest, Libeskind in the Vilnius Academy. And we, of course, I have no any reason to introduce our guest, because if you are here, you know who is he. So, please welcome on stage Libeskind.
Good morning. Is it possible? Yes, okay. Good morning. Very nice to see you here. Very nice to be in Vilnius. So let me share with you some thoughts. The title here is Language of Places. What is a place? You know, a place is not only the physical topography, in my view. It's much more than that. A place is even the mind, and even the spiritual sense of who we are, where others are, is also a place. So when I speak of language of places, it's not just a geographical idea, it's really a cultural idea. And I think you probably share with me the idea that architecture is a cultural discipline, even though it has a lot of scientific, mathematical knowledge necessary to practice it. Ultimately, it's closer probably to the liberal arts, to literature, to poetry, to astronomy, to lyrics, to dance, and so on. So let me share with you, maybe the light should come down a little bit, it's hard to probably see. Maybe it can make it a little darker because it's too much light. Oh yes, that's better. Is it in focus? Doesn't seem to be in focus. Okay, let me share with you how I came to architecture. You know, I didn't work in architectural offices. I tried it for 1 or 2 days, and I didn't like it. I didn't think it was for me. So I tried to kind of forge a path along a different trajectory, and that trajectory was drawing. Because I really believe, and I still do, that architecture doesn't come from going to the site. It doesn't come from putting nails in a piece of wood. It comes from drawing. And my drawings were really not drawings of buildings, but were really non-figurative drawings that spoke about structure of spaces. And I created really a series of drawings of different kinds. And you can imagine that at the time when I drew them, they were not really considered architecture drawings because they were not fantasies of buildings, yet they grappled with the issue of space. I also did other things. I built machines. I mean, they were not sophisticated machines technically. Is that better than this? Yes? Okay. They were kind of experiential machines, medieval machines. This was the reading machine I built some years ago. I built the writing machine. And by the way, building machines is something recommended in the earliest books on architecture, that architects should know how to build machines. But these were kind of machines of an experiential kind, a memory machine, sort of also, so each one had a different idea, medieval, contemporary, Renaissance, the puppet play in the mind. So machines that were in kind of investigations, like drawings themselves. And then I did other series of drawings. This was a later one called Chamber Works. By the way, they are now on exhibition in the Museum of Modern Art in New York and an exhibition on art and music. So again, I'm interested. I was a musician once upon a time in my earlier life. I was a professional musician. And I thought music is very important in architecture. And these drawings had to do with architecture, proportions, scale, horizons, different investigations. And that's really how I came really to architecture, through these drawings. And I highly recommend that architects generally, we have now computers, we can draw really virtual, in a virtual realm, but I think nothing replaces this act of drawing, which is very primordial because it is something like an action that precedes even writing. And I think that's something that I was always interested in. And by the way, all the masters that I've studied, modern, Baroque, Renaissance, earlier, recommended that if you want to learn something, draw. Don't read, don't just travel, don't gossip, draw. My last series of drawings is a series that I did for the city of Venice at the Venice Biennale. What are the fundamentals of architecture? These are drawings, and this series I called Sonnets in Babylon. They're based on Babylon, on Iraq today, but also on Shakespeare, on the ideas of a different kind of space. Again, the series of drawings I don't do just for entertainment. I use them in my work. I use them as kind of planning ideas and spatial ideas for the work that I'm working on. So you can see changes in as I sort of progress in some direction in architecture. I have to share with you really my first project, because I didn't build my architecture when I was in the 20s or 30s. I was in my 40s when I started with my first building. I never built a building before this building. But the Jewish Museum in Berlin, means more than just really building. It's how to create something across the abyss, the complete destruction of Europe from Berlin, from Germany. And you can see in this drawing, early drawing of this star, the urban star of David, you can see that white line is the wall. We're just celebrating the 25th anniversary of the fall of the wall. But when I did it, I thought this project had nothing to do with the political division between East and West, because it had to do with Jews, it had to do with the destruction of culture. It didn't have to do with the political division of Germany at all. So that's about Berlin itself. And one can always ask, where is the site? Where is the building standing? It's not really just a piece of land in Berlin. It's standing on all the people, all the names, and there are thousands of names associated with the destruction of European culture, of Europe itself, in the millions. I cannot say I went into the millions, but there are hundreds and thousands implicated in the planning of this museum. And I have to say that I did not use pure architectural methods. I invented methods which I would call para-architectural. One of my ideas was to complete an opera by Schoenberg, Arnold Schoenberg, Moses and Aaron. He wrote only 2 acts on this opera. He never completed the 3rd one because he had to leave Berlin. But I thought it can be completed musically by me in the footsteps of the visitors across the void, because the center of the building is an emptiness. It's not an atrium. You don't enter an atrium. You enter really something that is absent in the center of the building, and something which is there nevertheless. And so the echoes across the void are part of Einbahnstraße. I also tried to open up this Walter Benjamin's idea of the one-way street from the other side, so to speak, of history. So different ideas juxtaposed to the Baroque building, and it has a complex geometry, because you don't enter the building from the outside, you enter into the underground kind of overture of different ways, and the ways lead to different places, to the dead end, for example, which is the Holocaust. It's a dead end. It's whatever is Europe today. It's a different Europe. It's a different world, different Berlin, different understanding of humanity. And by the way, in this Holocaust Tower, I have to tell you an anecdote, because the dead end, there's no light in it. And I worked really for many years on this project. It took many years to build it, politically and so on. I didn't have any light in here, because I don't think there is a light in the Holocaust. There's no light. It's just pure evil, pure darkness, pure destruction. But I read a story, actually an account of one of the survivors after the war, who survived one of these concentration camps, who said that when she was placed in the cattle cars, she saw a crack of light. And I don't know whether she was a crack of light in the car or in her mind, but she said she kept on to this light, to this vertical, to this line of light throughout her horrific experiences. And she believed later on in Brooklyn in the 70s that she survived because she kept to this line of light. Well, whatever that means, I opened this sharp gap in this sharp angled form at the end, even though it was about to be constructed without any light. And I thought there must be some light for us to understand something. And of course, the Garden of Exile too. It's about exile. Not only have Berliners and Jews and others been exiled from Berlin, but Berlin is exiled from itself. It's a different city today. The actual Berlin of the 30s, 20s is somewhere else. So this is a very symbolic garden. It's 7 times 7. It's all at right angles to an oblique plane. The earth is inside of these columns. 7 times 7, 49. The central column has the earth of Jerusalem. 48, earth of Berlin. 1948, creation of the State of Israel. And the staircase of hope, which continues upward. You notice it doesn't end with a big door or with a big hooray, history goes on. It ends with an oblique kind of movement across a blank wall, because history continues in often ambiguous ways. And it continues to the exhibitions, which, as you see, to have no conventional windows. These are sort of, those are those marks of a topography of Berlin that is not explicit, but it's implicit in that star matrix that I created at the beginning. And of course, the memory void, that echoing space with the Kadishman faces, is part of that experience of what is in the center of the building. And of course, the building itself is emblematic. And I have to say that I'm really very happy that this building, even though it doesn't have anything but fragments of history, it doesn't have any major collection, it's probably the most visited museum in Germany, in Berlin, which has fantastic museums. So, people are interested in history, in something that moves them, in emotion. And I was able later on to build the glass court. Originally there was no program in the museum for having social events, for dinners. Nobody expected that to happen. But this is now a very highly used space for people. So the museum grows, programs grow. It's not a static institution, and it's now full of life. And as is the new extension that I did on the other side of the street, in the old Blumenhalle, the old flower market, which is the Jewish Museum Academy. Hundreds of thousands of people come, learn about the past. There's researchers, there's library, archives, researchers, place to meet. And you notice this writing, which I put, actually, that's my own invention. It's a kind of statement. It's not my own. I copied it from Maimonides, Moses Maimonides, about 1,000 years ago. Written first in Arabic, then Judeo-Arabic. I also have it in German and English, which says, hear the truth. Hear the truth, wherever it comes from. Basically, that's the statement. And it's good because it's in a Turkish neighborhood. It's not anywhere. And we see so much intolerance around the world against immigrants, against strangers, against foreigners. That's not endemic only to Germany. It's kind of a global illness. And of course, library and view back towards the Baroque Altbau. And a building that really, it's not a big building, but it has had, I think, an impact on transforming how people see this amazing city of Berlin, this great rising city again, in a very important part of the world. Again, moving through history with a sense that the memory is important. Very different project, almost on the polar opposite. I won a competition for the Military History Museum of Germany in Dresden. By the way, it's the largest museum in Germany. You will not be surprised that a military museum is by far the largest museum in Germany. It was built in this beautiful city, the Elba of the North. It was considered by painters, by architects, by artists. One of the most beautiful, like Venice of the North. And you probably, maybe you have not seen this picture. After the 1945 Allied bombings of Dresden, a complete leveling of the city. This beautiful city, Baroque city, is completely just gone in the catastrophes that emanated from Germany. I was able to build and renovate the old armory, this U-shaped building that you see. It's a whole military headquarters overlooking the city of Dresden. And you can see this form, new addition, also in a very, very specific geometry standing within it. What is it? Well, the building is the armory, built in the 19th century, which was already a museum, a military museum. It became the Kaiser's military museum, the Nazi military museum, the Soviet Russian military museum, the East German military museum, and now in the New Germany, again, military museum of Germany, German history. you can see that this vector is pointing a specific place and it has a specific form. It's a kind of triangle which points to the first bomb that was released on Dresden by the Allied bombings and the triangulation from which the bombings itself destroyed the city. So the building is both a renovation, restoration of the old building, which was really kind of badly handled by the East German government. It was kind of a ruin, you know. I restored it, etc. I restored many aspects of this 19th century building. But then you can see this wedge-like form that dramatically cuts the building and brings people forward to the building. And I have to say, when I was building it, an older German was standing there. He didn't know I was the architect. I was coming down the steps, and he was just looking at the building. And he said to me, you know, I'm very, very disturbed by this building, by this addition. And I said, good, because we should be disturbed by what military history brings to us today and yesterday. So there's a juxtaposition, completely two different things living together in the singular space. In plan, you can see, you know, it's a cut, like a section through the building. You can see that the horizontal represents the chronology. You know, this is exhibitions from the 13th century, you know, Teutonic Knights, all the way to German forces in NATO today, in Afghanistan, and so on. And the arrow, that arrow pointing to that bombing of the city, the erasure of the city, is actually cut between exactly 1914, 1945, the years of militarism that were so catastrophic for the world, coming from the thinking of militarization and really dictatorial ideas. The building is not just a facade. The building really cuts through the opacity of the building completely as a form and creates totally new space within this armory. So the armory is also restored. It's interesting because this is like, by the way, in the United States, West Point. This is where German officers, German military come to learn about the history of the military. So it's a very important public building also for the military. And then there's this cut, and in this ribbon, there is a continuous, very nice exhibition made by Barbara Holzer, who worked in my office, and Hage Mertz. So we worked very closely on the design of the interior. Here is the line from Clausewitz on war. It's a very important book, even today, when you see what's going on in the Middle East and Africa. You come across this oblique wall, you move upwards. And by the way, animals, you know, we know lions of Judah, we know the Hannibals, elephants, but we seldom think of, you know, Laika, the dog in space, biological weapons. So the extent to which nature itself has been brought into militarized state. And even toys. You can see the old staircase, the toys that kids play with. It's part of the mindset. So the weapons here are really emblematic. They are not really display of weapons. The displays of weapons are elsewhere. It's really just to make one think, you know, what is the Dora racket, the slave labor? How is it that Werner von Braun, the head of the SS, received the Presidential Medal of Honor in the United States as a head of the NASA space race with the Russians? We have to think about these things. And so the helicopter, the things that are shown in ways that are not aesthetic. They're ways to think about violence that comes from the top, from the bottom. And then as you ascend upwards to those upper levels, you see also the destruction of other cities from Dresden. You know, Wieliczka in Poland, Rotterdam in Holland, Coventry in the UK. The destruction that stemmed from this place. And then you can actually leave the museum on an upward moving plane outside in the winds of Dresden, see the Frauenkirche, see the rebuilt city, amazing city, Baroque city being rebuilt, and also point yourself towards and be inside of the triangulation of destruction. So it's both. It's both, you're in the place that has been destroyed, you know that you're in a new city, but you're also facing the rebuilding and the consequences that created the rebuilding itself. So it's a dramatic building. It's a building that is a military museum. I would say it's unlike any military museum in the world. It's not a museum in Washington or in Paris or in London. It's as close as a military museum comes to be a museum of thinking about war, because what happens in this new structure, there are questions being asked. You know, why do people follow fanatical leaders? Why do people cooperate? Why do people march in step with commands? There are no answers given. Nobody can give answers to these questions. Only the individual can give an answer to this question. And so there it is. Something new in Germany, something new. And by the way, Germany is not Germany. It's part of Europe. It's a museum visited by many people, and certainly has changed the view of what it means to destroy a city. A very different topic in Dublin, one of my favorite cities. I was able to build a large hall, performance center for 2,200 people, and a piazza on the old docklands. Something fantastic in a city that has so much culture. But my quest was to not just to build a big, expensive building. You know, it's easy to build big, expensive buildings. How do you build in a public-private partnership, public space on the waterfront, decrease and diminish the footprint of a building, and create a building that for 2,200 people with all the infrastructure is 45 million euros, about a fraction, maybe a tenth of other large buildings of that scale in Germany and other places. So again, that's part of what I believe. Affordability is not about aesthetics, it's about ethics, and one has to really create architecture that can be built. How can I build? I also built 2 large office complexes that support this theater. One is occupied by Facebook, one by a big law company. So really creating a kind of connectivity between culture and commerce in order to be able to have culture. That's part of the building. And it's really, Dublin is one of my favorite cities. You can see the footprint, how small it is, how the building is shaped. And it's a very good acoustics. It's a hall that has opera, that has rock concerts, that has the TED conferences. So it's a really fine acoustical hall. And you can see that the lobbies are pretty small. They're kind of vertical. I didn't believe in the huge lobby. People spend money on the marble lobbies. Just make the lobbies very small, very vertical. Of course, it's Dublin, so every lobby has a pub. You can order your beer for the intermission. But it works very, very well. It's a kind of a hub of interesting things. And it's a kind of transparent curtain that allows the public to move through this public space, creates a really energetic center of culture in this beautiful city, which really never had a building for such large-scale performances. So it's really changed this whole area. Now, Google is moving in there, many companies also housing. So the area is changing on the old docklands. It just shows that bringing a practical building onto a old, fallow industrial area can really transform the city completely. Very different project in Singapore. Building housing. Now, housing is one of the most difficult things for architects to do because it's very defined what housing is. But I won this competition to build, high-density housing, and I actually convinced the city of Singapore, it's a city-state, to be able to build much higher, 40% higher, to create more density, more height, and allow more land to be freed. It's a very dense, thank you so much, very dense city. You can see that there are low-rise buildings, which are 7 to 15 stories high, and then these double high towers with amenities in the bridges between the towers. My idea was very simple, to give everybody a unique, customized view of this very compressed area. So it's not a bunch of blocks repeating itself. By the way, it's very difficult to do this because then every building has to be kind of different. You have to work very hard. It's not just repeating a statistic over and over again. It's a sculptural way of handling it and creating public spaces on the waterfront, Olympic-sized swimming pool, cafes, places to meet, kind of activating the urban sense of life with very dramatic architecture as well. And you can see here how much land has been left over in this. Thousands of people live there. By the way, I want to point out that these buildings are doubly curved. They are not just facades. These are not, building, which means that each floor plate is in a different position of space. And that has a very special floating effect when you're in the different apartments. Well, of course, the developer took kind of a risk. It's never been done. You see facades that are around, but not the whole apartments shifted in space. But it was the most profitable project in a very competitive city. Now I'm building a whole other neighborhood, really almost next door. Very different kind, very different program. But again, I believe that housing is very, very important. Now in a different context, this is European context. In Milan, where I also live, this is where the fairgrounds used to be Fiera di Milano. They moved to the suburbs, and I was able to build this master plan with 3 tall buildings with 2 other architects. The central one is mine, and also housing, high density housing. The tower is under construction now. Part of the piazza, green piazza, bringing back transportation to the center, a walkable city, and also very, very dense apartment buildings. So how do you create this huge density that has a quality of social life, that has a scale, but is completely contemporary, yet picks up the traditional aspects of a really high level of living in Milan, in terms of material, in terms of orientation of building, in terms of sustainability of buildings, in terms of the aesthetic of buildings themselves. You see here there's a lot of effort to shape. You cannot shape the apartment itself because they're just commercial entities, but you can shape and create a kind of terraces that move the building beyond its own economic logic to create identity for each of these units, and there are really thousands of these units, and create different effects, architectural in light and in space, to break up the massing of very, very large buildings and create something that has a certain character of Milan itself. So you can see here with the Art Nouveau buildings next door, and you can see the large mass, the park. So that's a project that is going on. This part is finished. Now I'm working on the tower and so on. Now something very different. I never in my life did a house. I once did a small studio for an artist in Mallorca, but I never built a house. But then I had a chance where a couple came to me and asked me if I would design a house for them. And it was just the right couple, because they were experts on art, experts in architecture. They investigated all architects, and they knew exactly what they wanted. So I created a house for them. It's a very modest house. It's a model. You can see that it has no right-angled walls. You can see that it's a very compact plan. It's a very small house in Connecticut, about an hour away from New York. The section of the house varies dramatically within the singular form, has different characteristics, and stands in this beautiful open landscape in Connecticut. It's not a picture of house. It's not it doesn't look really like a house in Connecticut. And I didn't want to make a house that is sort of a box with big windows and views. That's over. It's kind of an old way of thinking. Make a sustainable house where the openings are not large, where the light is just moving in the winter and the summer in the correct way. Porches that bring out the living in the right point. A very compact house. And I had also another requirement of this couple, which is that they have a big art collection, but they didn't want to have any art in the house. They said, we want the house to inspire us. We'll keep the art in New York. We want in Connecticut to be inspired by the house. So that's really a tough assignment to do that. And as you can see, the building is stainless steel, which really reflects I cannot show it to you, but sometimes it's black, sometimes it's light blue, sometimes it's green, depending on your angle of approach to the house and the particular daylight conditions. It's made out of self-supporting, panelized steel structure, which means there are no columns inside. It's just a completely folded, continuous form. But the inside of the house is completely solid wood. It's oak, it's thick oak, it's not oak veneer. And by the way, I was able to do also all the furniture. They asked me to do all the interiors. Wow, it's kind of a Gesamtkunstwerk for me. So they're great cooks, the kitchen, what it had to be. You get a little bit of a sense of the house, what it is. And of course, it's lighting, the character of atmosphere in the house is part of working closely with the client, very knowledgeable, what kind of thing they want. I was even able to do a shower, which I'd never done before. And it's a shower without any curves. It's really just a very acute shower. And I was even able to do, the faucets. Because I really don't like Arne Jacobson's faucets are very nice, but they are from the 50s. It's time to do new faucets. So I was able to invent a kind of a beautiful new way to have the hot water, the cold water. And the house it's kind of magic, it's characteristic, it glows. And by the way, the only mistake I made in the house is that the clients gave me the key once and said, you can stay in the house for a weekend. And I stayed, and then my wife, now from then on, said, why don't we live in a house like this? So again, it's a very small project, but you know, I realized how beautiful it is to build a small project. I never had such an opportunity in this landscape, in this place. Something I never thought I would do is work in China. You know, for many years, most of the architects have worked in China because that's kind of the money maker. But you know, because of my own background, I didn't want to work in China. But somehow I was lucky to find the right client who came to me and said, you know, Mr. Libeskind, would you like to build a museum of history in China, in Wuhan, but privately financed? It's not a government building. The government will not decide. It'll be a real museum. It's not an empty museum that is just built for propaganda purposes. It's a museum for the people of Wuhan, which is one of the rising cities of China. And the museum is dedicated. If you don't know Zhang Zhidang, I highly recommend you study him. This wise Confucian man was the first to think during the Xinhai Revolution of how to modernize China, how to bring steel industry to China, into Wuhan, how to produce railways, weapons. This is a man, by the way, his grave was desecrated during the Cultural Revolution. He's a great thinker, and I thought of Zhang Zhidang, Chinese Revolution, modernization, and the progress of China despite all the difficulties in the world. So I created a building that has many aspects that relates to the Yangtze River. It's on the river, the Great Pagoda, the earliest Shang and Chu forms for trade, the navigational composition diagrams that originated in Wuhan. So where is it? It's standing in this old factory district, and the factories are still there. Were there a year ago. But they'll come down. But I suggested keeping some of the old buildings to restore them, renovate them, create a kind of gateway, and create a building that it really celebrates the place itself. With the restoration of the old buildings, but also it's a kind of a gateway to the area. You can see that it's converted industrial buildings, it has new museum building, but you don't see the museum building. To make a sustainable building, don't make a building that, make a building float. Don't touch, there's gravity. We have to make a building. The building has to stand on the ground, but how do we reduce the gravity, and how do we create exhibitions that are kind of spectacular with dramatic views of Wuhan and so on? I did it by lifting the building on two rather slender legs. So the building is elevated. It's a big building. And you can see there's ticketing, there's loading. As you go up, you have special theaters for the exhibitions with the windows opening towards the industrial part. You have the industry exhibition, you have the silos for education, you have the local exhibitions, you have the lounge, the terrace, the restaurant. So basically, I organized the building in a kind of urban way, having to do with the uniqueness of this place. One of the things that you'll notice, I noticed in China, that you have many celebrated architects working in China, but if you look at their buildings, after the photographs have been taken, take a month, 2 months, a year, you see that they're all in ruins, because the buildings are very poorly built by workforce from the countryside. So I was apparently the first architect to make one-to-one mock-ups. They made 3 of them. Each one was, horrible. Okay, let's make it better, make it a little better. So to make a sustainable building, you have to do 2 things. First of all, do not exploit the workers. So I made sure that nobody gets hurt on the site. That's beyond Chinese regulations. Check how many people are hurt in industrial accidents in China. Second, make a building that people can really craft, so that it is integrated. It's not a ruin after the photographs are taken. It really works for the city. And it's not easy to do, because you have to educate the workforce. It's a dramatic building. It's a building that now the exhibitions are beginning. I'm working with the exhibition design also with exhibition. So I think it's going to be a very interesting building to come to. And you can see the scale is very illusory, because it's a fantastically large building, elevated. But I think it'll give that kind of area, this old industrial area with some of these old buildings, kind of a new glow, and create a fascinating conversation about what is China really? Where is it coming from? What do we celebrate? Not just the general progress, but those visionaries like Zhang Zhidang, who understood how the colonialization of China was such a negative factor of its history. Okay, very quickly, because I'm here, I have to tell you, I've been on this trip for 7 days now. 7 days. First day I was working on Ground Zero in New York. Second day I was in Toronto. I'm building a skyscraper, almost finished. In Toronto I also built a museum there, the largest museum in Canada, Royal Ontario Museum. Third day I was in Miami, Basel, because I had some exhibitions of my work in Miami, Basel. Fourth day I was in Berlin, where I'm building a new project in Berlin, so I was there to do that. Fifth day I was, still the same day, I was in London, where we are working on a project. And the sixth day I was in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. And when I was in Saudi Arabia, people said, "Where is your next stop, Mr. Libeskind?" I said, "Vilnius." They said, "What?" And they said, "Why are you going there? What are you doing there?" I said, "Well, I have a very, very small project, very modest project on this hill that you know well, between the airport and the old city, for like a little ski center." But my idea was a little bigger than just a ski center, was how to really activate this, create a social space, a public space that can be used in the summer, that has that is accessible to mothers with carriages and people, not just sports people, that has a character where you can come to, and two modest buildings. You can see very, very simple sections with restaurants and bistros. In the model form, you can see that it's a kind of almost a kind of a cradled piazza with a colonnade, with a low building which is very functional for the ski rental and retail. The upper building with social activities, event spaces. You can see in this model kind of something very humble, but I think something worth doing, because it's not how big a project is, it's what a project represents. And Vilnius is such a beautiful place with a lot of history, with a lot of connections. We Jews from New York, a lot of us are Litvaks, a lot of us are from this area, so it's not really a foreign place for us to design either. So I hope that this really low-cost project will contribute to something good in this place. Now I go to my last project, maybe the most difficult project in New York. I call it Memory Foundations. It's a vast project which is very complex in every way you can think about it. And everybody knows where they were on September 11, 2001, because it's such a memorable day. It's a date that changed the world. The way we travel, the way we think, the way we look at the news, everything has changed on that day. Where was I? I was in Berlin, because my studio was in Berlin. And after working for 12 years on the Jewish Museum, it wasn't easy. The museum was to open its doors at 7 o'clock in the evening on September 11, 2001. But it never did, because in the afternoon of the attacks, afternoon in Berlin, we saw those images. And the government decided the museum would not open. And I thought about it a lot. You think you work for 12 years, you think the museum will open, and then on that day, it does not open. And then I thought, okay, I have to return back to New York. I'm from the Bronx, from Poland, but I'm also from the Bronx. I have to return to New York. I didn't know why, but I thought I should be there. And how ironic that I won the competition to be the master planner of this large project. Now, what is the master plan about? It's to bring really a new idea to this place. At the end, there were 7 finalists, all friends, great architects. Everybody did the same thing except myself. Everybody built big buildings in the center. And I said, it's not possible. It's a piece of real estate, very valuable. Every square centimeter counts for money. But you should never build anything in the center of this place, because people perish there. And so don't do it. Build the buildings on the periphery and create symbols, relationships to history, to American history, to world history on the site. I show you this not out of vanity, but to show you how difficult this project is. Who are the stakeholders of this project? Families of the victims, in the thousands. We have thousands of people, children, brothers, sisters, grandparents, in the thousands who have a stake in this site. We have the Port Authority, a huge organization that owns the land and leases the land to private developers and their own architects. And the Port Authority is managed by 2 powerful governors, Governor of New York and Governor of New Jersey. And Mayor of New York is in charge of the streets of New York, with New York City. Then you have the path train authorities that are in charge of the trains that run below, and of course the MTA that runs the subways. So within the 16-acre site, you have a microcosm of the complexity of a large-scale city. And to go from a sketch on the left to the reality on the right, you have to forge a consensus. You have to bring people together who have very different ideas what to do.
You know, very completely opposite ideas of what to do on the site. So that's, by the way, why I believe in democracy. You know, because it's easy to build, you know, for kings and monarchs to tell you, okay, go ahead, do this great project. It's fantastic, great picture of no, work in the complexity of democracy. You have to forge a consensus, and that consensus, I think, is good for architecture, even though it is difficult for an architect. What is a master plan? Some people don't really know, so I'll tell you because I was a musician. You know, to compose a piece of music, you have to write a score. The score has to be very accurate. Every note has to be perfect. You cannot approximate a note. It has to be perfect, just like the geometry and space of a master plan. But what do you do with a score? Well, you don't play the score. You conduct the score. The conductor's back is turned to the audience, not his front. And the composer is not playing the violin or the cello on the stage. It's kind of hidden. But the music, like a master plan, has to be given over for performance and to be interpreted perfectly. Vibrations, accurate, and in a master plan, every line, every spatial construct has to be given for interpretation. And by the way, music has to be interpreted. You can't just play mechanical music. You have to be able to interpret that note. Same thing in architecture. It's not a mechanical operation of transferring one space to another. You have to give a leeway of interpretation to the thousands of people who are working on such a master plan. And that's exactly what it is. You take the 16-acre site, and you can see Hudson River on the left. You can see here kind of the geometry of the site. And I just want to tell you what is on the site. Beyond the memorial, beyond the museum, beyond the transportation hub, beyond the 10 million square feet of density of office space, 10 million, it's an entire city. You could put the entire downtown of American city into the 16-acre. You can take, you know, Baltimore or Denver or, I don't know, some big city, and it would fit into this thing. That's how dense and complex it is. And the complexity is also below the ground. Actually, that's the most complex part, because it's 75 feet underground. You have to be able to figure out, and not just security, but the core, the infrastructure, transportation, everything comes out from the bedrock of New York and comes out from this, you know, as you descend through the visitor center, you remember this incredible wall, the slurry wall, which is the foundation of the site that we should have never seen. And by the way, in my scheme, I propose to keep it open. It's very difficult to keep a foundation open. Because foundations are meant to put something on top of it. They're structurally meant to have something on top of them. To keep a foundation open is an act of kind of affirmation of the importance of what it needs to support the site. And this foundation now is part of the museum, the September 11th Museum, which is not just a museum of the loss of thousands of people from around the world. It's also a museum of the incredible character of people on the day, what happened, how people came together. It's very moving. Since it opened in May, it has had already 1 million visitors. It's a very interesting place to go deep down. And that's what I fought for, that it should not be only the memorial on top, but the entire ground has, in a secular society, a kind of sacred character, that nothing is built, nothing is put there. You know, bus parking was wanted there, infrastructure, all sorts of things. You know, you want to use this site, but I was lucky that the Port Authority and others appreciated the idea. Of course, the memorial itself is vast. I created from the 16 acres about 8 acres, half of it, public space, because I believe that the most important thing is public space. You know, if you don't make a public space, you lose the chance forever to have a public space. And Manhattan, Lower Manhattan needs, you know, it's a lot of dark streets with the footprints, the size of the buildings, with the waterfalls, which were highly criticized by the tabloids of New York when I proposed them in my master plan. They thought, craziest stupidity. How do you bring Niagara Falls into the middle of, you know, Manhattan? But it works because it brings nature, it screens the sound of very busy streets, and creates a different sense of urban space, something memorable, something that is interesting, vivid. And by the way, it's still a construction site. But you have to know that since even during the construction, more than 20 million, 25 million people have been in this construction site already. So you can imagine when it's finished, what it will be. I created an extra space, actually, a public space from Broadway. I call it the Wedge of Light, which marks the times of the attack, 8:46 when the first tower was struck, and 10:28 when the second tower collapsed. And I wanted to create this extras, because there's not enough public space anyway in Manhattan. And you can see that I took this picture from tower number 4. You can see the central skylight of the PATH terminal is aligned with on the southern side, and you see the foundation of tower number 2, which by the way will be taller than the Empire State Building, just to get the scale right, is that space, the wedge of light. And you can see here the times, how the light works. So it's a memorial in the light of the day. Even on a gray day when there is no sun, as there was on that particular day, you'll feel the shift within this grid of New York. And you'll feel the shift even in the buildings. Now, I said that most of the architects, all the architects, proposed megastructures. 1 tall building, 2 tall buildings, Foster, double, kissing towers. Meyer and Eisenman and Stephen Hall, megastructure in the center. I said the opposite. Create as many buildings as possible, so they're as low as possible. So they're not as high as possible, as low as possible, because it's better streets. Lower buildings make better streets. You don't have the wind tunnels. Put them on the outside of the scheme, on the periphery, so they don't throw shadows on the public space. And do them in such a way that they can be built in segments. Nobody has money to build a megastructure or one building, huge building. People have money to build relatively modest buildings. And that's exactly what it is. You see that the buildings stand in the grid. They echo the Torch of Liberty. They stand, but they are kind of torqued within that grid. And this photograph is probably already out of date. But you see on the right side, the Freedom Tower, the tower number 1, which is 1776 feet high to its tip, symbolic date of the Declaration of Independence, which is not propagandistic, but it's the first document of human rights in the world, actually. People have human rights. You can see visitors, you see the footprints at the plaza already there. You can see the PATH terminal with the dramatic 1028 skylight. Tower number 2, you can see almost the wedge of light piazza as it enters. So you see tower number 3 under construction. Tower number 4 completed. Tower number 5 hasn't started. The museum underground. So you can see that it's a progressive. It's not a scheme that you can realize to kind of at once. It needs time, and it needs to be built together with the economic imperatives. Nobody has money to build such a scheme. It's not a government scheme, even though everybody is involved in it. It's still just a regular scheme. Has not been declared a special area by anyone, governor, the president, or anybody else. So that's the nature, I think, of planning a democracy. It's progressive. It's limited. It's not a big gesture at once. It's cumulative. But I wanted also to make it symbolic. And you can see tower number 1, tower number 4 already in the skyline of New York, very dominant, this place. And you can see what it will look like, this kind of crown, this space at which the center is that flame of liberty. And I end here where I really began, because I mentioned I was an immigrant to New York. And I lived under a communist dictatorship. I know what it feels like. And when I came by boat, I was one of the last immigrants to come by boat, because later on it became cheaper to fly. So I was lucky to be on the boat at, my mother woke me up and my sister at 5 o'clock in the morning. You're going to see New York. And what does a person, 13-year-old, see when they come as immigrants? They pass by this statue. And only later I discovered what it says. Emma Lazarus, the great American poet, Jewish. What it says on the statue: give me your poor, you're tired, your yearning masses wanting to be free. Give us the refuse. Give us the people nobody wants. Come here. That's beautiful about America. Give us the people nobody wants. The garbage of the world. Give it to us. And I felt it when I saw that skyline. Wow, it's an amazing. It's not possible in such a complicated society that you can build such a thing, without an oppressive government, this crown. So yes, that's what I wanted to do. It's really what the scheme is about. It's about New York. It's about America. It's about its true values, which have to do with liberty. It has to do with freedom. That's what the scheme is about. Thank you.